The rain fell heavy on the muddy fields of Okinawa in April 1945. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka stood beside his Type 97 Chiha medium tank, watching the horizon with tired eyes. He was only 23 years old, but the war had aged him beyond his years. His uniform, once crisp and proud, now hung loose on his thin frame. 3 years of combat had taught him that glory was a lie sold to young men who didn't know better. Beside him, Sergeant Kenji Yamamoto cleaned his rifle with mechanical precision. Kenji was older, 35, a career soldier who had fought in Manchuria before this nightmare began. His face was weathered like old leather, marked by a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. He rarely smiled anymore. The Americans were coming. Everyone knew it. The island was their last real defense before the homeland. Hiroshi had seen the reconnaissance reports. Hundreds of ships, thousands of Marines, and tanks, so many tanks. That morning, Captain Masao Fujiwara had gathered the tank crews for a briefing. Fujiwara was a true believer, one of the old guard who still spoke of Bushido and honorable death. He stood before them in the command tent, his sword hanging at his side like a relic from another century. "We have 40 tanks," Fujiwara announced. "The Americans have hundreds, but we have something they lack. We have the spirit of our ancestors. We have the willingness to die for the Emperor." Hiroshi had heard this speech before. Different words, same meaning. They were going to lose, and they were going to die doing it. Private Takeshi Nakamura, barely 18, raised his hand nervously. "Sir, what about their Sherman tanks? I heard they have thick armor." "Our guns might not penetrate," Fujiwara's eyes narrowed. "The Sherman is a light tank, Private. It looks impressive, but it's built for speed, not combat. One well-placed shot from our 47mm gun will crack it open like an egg. The Americans rely on numbers because they lack courage. We will show them what happens when quantity meets quality." The young soldiers nodded, wanting to believe. Hiroshi said nothing. He had fought Shermans before at Saipan. He knew what they could do. After the briefing, Kenji pulled Hiroshi aside. They walked through the palm trees toward their tank position. The jungle was unnaturally quiet. Even the birds had fled. "You don't believe him," Kenji said. It wasn't a question. Hiroshi kicked at a fallen coconut. "Does it matter what I believe? We follow orders, we fight, we probably die." Kenji lit a cigarette, cupping his hand against the wind. "My daughter is 5 years old. I haven't seen her in 2 years. My wife writes letters, but they take months to arrive. The last one said Tomoko learned to write her name." He paused, smoke drifting from his lips. "I want to see my daughter write her name, Hiroshi. I want to go home." "We all want to go home," Hiroshi replied quietly. That evening, the tank crews worked on their machines. Hiroshi's crew consisted of 4 men. There was Kenji on the main gun, Private Takeshi as loader, Corporal Daichi Sato as driver, and Hiroshi himself as commander. They had been together for 8 months, since the Philippines. That was a lifetime in this war. Daichi was 21, a farmer's son from Hokkaido. He could drive the Chiha through terrain that would stop other tanks. He never complained, never questioned. He just did his job with quiet competence. Takeshi was the baby. He had lied about his age to enlist, 17 instead of 18. He still wrote letters to his mother every week, though Hiroshi doubted they would ever reach Japan now. The boy had good instincts, though. Fast hands, quick thinking. He might survive if luck smiled on him. As darkness fell, they ate their rations in silence. Rice balls and dried fish, the same meal they had eaten for weeks. Hiroshi watched his men and felt a terrible weight in his chest. These were good soldiers. They deserved better than this. The radio crackled. All units prepared defensive positions. Enemy landing craft spotted approaching southern beaches. "This is not a drill." "Repeat, this is not a drill." Hiroshi stood, brushing rice from his uniform. He looked at his crew, these men who trusted him to keep them alive. "Mount up," he ordered. "Check your ammunition. Load armor-piercing rounds first." They moved with practiced efficiency, climbing into the cramped interior of the Chiha. The metal was cold despite the tropical heat. Hiroshi settled into the commander's position, adjusting his periscope. Through the viewfinder, he could see the ocean in the distance. The sun was setting, painting the water red like blood, and there on the horizon he saw them. Ships, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The Americans had arrived. The bombardment started at dawn. Naval guns turned the sky into thunder. Shells screamed overhead, exploding in the jungle behind their position. Trees splintered like matchsticks. The earth shook so violently that Hiroshi's teeth rattled in his skull. Inside the tank, the crew sat in terrified silence. Each explosion felt close enough to end them. Takeshi was praying quietly, his lips moving without sound. Daichi gripped the controls with white knuckles. Even Kenji, who had seen everything, looked pale in the dim light. This went on for 2 hours. 2 hours of hell raining from the sky. When it finally stopped, the silence felt wrong, unnatural. Hiroshi opened the commander's hatch and looked out. The landscape had changed. What had been jungle was now a wasteland of shattered trees and smoking craters. The smell of explosives hung thick in the air. Movement on the beach. Landing craft dropping their ramps. American Marines pouring out like ants from a disturbed nest. Behind them, larger craft were unloading vehicles, jeeps, trucks, and tanks. All units, hold fire until they reach the kill zone, Captain Fujiwara's voice crackled over the radio. Let them come to us. Hiroshi watched through his periscope as the Americans advanced. They moved with confidence, spreading out in textbook formation. Professional soldiers who knew their craft. This wasn't like fighting the Chinese. These men had training, equipment, support. The first Sherman rolled off the landing craft and Hiroshi felt his stomach tighten. It was massive compared to his Chiha. Thicker armor, bigger gun, better engine. Everything about it screamed superiority. More Shermans followed. 5, 10, 15. They kept coming. That's a light tank? Takeshi whispered, staring through his vision port. Sir, that thing is huge. Steady, Hiroshi said, though his own hands were shaking. Load armor piercing. Prepare to engage on my command. The Shermans rolled forward, their tracks churning through the sand. Behind them, infantry followed, using the tanks as moving cover. Smart tactics. Overwhelming force. The radio burst to life. All tanks, open fire. For the Emperor. The Japanese position erupted. 40 tanks firing at once. The sound was deafening even inside the Chiha. Hiroshi watched as their shells struck the lead Shermans. Some bounced off harmlessly. Others left scars in the armor but didn't penetrate. Only one Sherman stopped, smoke pouring from its engine. The return fire was devastating. A Sherman's 75mm gun spoke once and the tank next to Hiroshi's exploded. The turret flew 30 feet into the air, spinning like a child's toy. Hiroshi knew that crew. 4 men he had eaten breakfast with that morning. Gone in an instant. Another Japanese tank burst into flames. Then another. The Shermans advanced methodically, firing with terrible accuracy. Each shot found its mark. The Chiha tanks were made of thin armor designed to fight Chinese infantry, not American steel. Fire, Hiroshi screamed. Kenji pulled the trigger. Their 47mm gun kicked back. The shell struck a Sherman's front plate and ricocheted into the sky. It didn't even slow down. Captain Fujiwara's tank died in a ball of orange flame. Hiroshi saw it happen through his periscope. One moment the captain was barking orders over the radio, the next his voice cut off mid-sentence. The transmission ended with a sound like metal tearing apart. Fall back, someone screamed over the radio. Fall back to secondary positions. But there was nowhere to go. The Shermans had flanked them. They were surrounding the Japanese positions like wolves circling wounded prey. Hiroshi counted 12 Chiha tanks burning. More than a quarter of their force gone in 15 minutes. A Sherman turned its turret toward them. Time seemed to slow. Hiroshi could see the barrel adjusting, finding its angle. He could imagine the American gunner inside, calm and professional, lining up the shot. Reverse. Now, Hiroshi shouted. Daichi threw the Chiha into reverse. The engine screamed. They lurched backward just as the Sherman fired. The shell passed so close that Hiroshi felt the heat through the open hatch. It hit the tree behind them, exploding bark and wood across their position. Move! 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 Hiroshi kept screaming. They crashed through the undergrowth, branches scraping against the hull. Behind them, 2 more Japanese tanks exploded. The Shermans were hunting them now, pushing forward with mechanical inevitability. Hiroshi's radio crackled with dying screams and desperate prayers. Men calling for their mothers. Men burning alive. The careful formation had collapsed into chaos. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a slaughter. A shell struck the ground beside them, showering the tank with dirt and stones. Takeshi was crying now, tears streaming down his young face. This wasn't what the recruiters had promised. This wasn't glorious. This was terror in its purest form. Kenji grabbed Hiroshi's arm. We need to abandon the tank. We're just targets in this thing. On foot we might have a chance. Hiroshi knew he was right. The Chiha was obsolete, a coffin on tracks. But abandoning it felt like admitting defeat. Like everything they had suffered was for nothing. Another explosion. Closer this time. The tank rocked violently. Warning lights flickered on the control panel. "Sir," Daichi shouted. "Engine is overheating. We're losing oil pressure." The decision was made for them. Stay in the tank and burn, or run and maybe live another hour. Out.
Everybody out.
They scrambled through the hatches like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Hiroshi's boots hit the ground and he immediately dove for cover behind a fallen log. His crew followed, scattering into the jungle. Behind them, their Chiha sat silent and abandoned. 3 years Hiroshi had commanded that machine. It had carried them through the Philippines, through Iwo Jima, all the way to Okinawa. Now it was just another piece of scrap metal waiting to be destroyed. If you're still with this story, witnessing how quickly everything can change in war, take a moment and subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will show you that sometimes survival requires more than just courage. They ran through the jungle for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Behind them, the sound of battle continued. Explosions, machine gun fire, the grinding of tank treads crushing everything in their path. Hiroshi led his crew deeper into the interior, away from the coast. They needed distance. They needed time to think. Kenji followed close behind, his rifle ready. Daichi and Takeshi brought up the rear, the young private still trembling from the shock. They found a small ravine hidden by thick vegetation. A stream ran through it, the water cool and clear. Hiroshi signaled for them to stop. They collapsed against the muddy banks, gasping for air. "How many tanks did we lose?" Takeshi asked between breaths. "Too many," Kenji replied. "Maybe 30. Maybe more." Hiroshi pulled out his canteen and drank deeply. His mind was racing. They couldn't fight the Shermans head-on. That much was clear. The Chiha was outmatched in every way. But maybe there was another approach. He had read about German tank tactics in North Africa. Ambush warfare, hit and run, used terrain to neutralize the enemy's advantages. The Shermans were powerful, but they were also predictable. They moved in formations. They followed roads when possible. They had patterns. "We need to stop thinking like tank commanders," Hiroshi said suddenly, "and start thinking like guerrillas." The others looked at him. Even Kenji seemed confused. Hiroshi drew in the dirt with a stick. "The Shermans have better armor, better guns, better everything. But they're also heavier, slower in rough terrain. If we can lure them into close range, into jungle where they can't maneuver, we might get shots at their weak points." "What weak points?" Daichi asked. "We hit one straight on and it did nothing. The rear armor," Hiroshi explained. "And the sides are thinner than the front. The tracks are vulnerable. And if we can get close enough, the underside has almost no protection." "That's suicide," Kenji said flatly. "Getting that close means they can return fire at point-blank range." Hiroshi met his friend's eyes. "We're dead anyway if we keep fighting the way we've been fighting. At least this gives us a chance." A distant explosion rumbled through the jungle. Somewhere more Japanese tanks were dying. More men were burning. Takeshi stood up, wiping his face. "I'll do it. Whatever the plan is, I'm with you, sir. I didn't come this far to run away." Daichi nodded. "Me too, my tank is still out there. If there's a way to make those bastards pay, I want to try." Kenji was quiet for a long moment. Then he chambered a round in his rifle. "My daughter deserves a father who fought smart, not one who threw his life away for nothing. What's the plan, Lieutenant?" Hiroshi looked at his crew. These men who had every reason to give up but chose to keep fighting. Something changed in that moment. The weight in his chest didn't disappear, but it shifted, became something else. Determination. They found 3 abandoned Chiha tanks near the secondary defensive line. 2 were damaged, but 1 looked operational. Hiroshi checked the fuel gauge, half full. Enough for what he had in mind. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would position themselves in a narrow valley where the jungle was thickest. When the Shermans came through, they would let the first ones pass, then attack from behind, targeting the rear armor and tracks. Hit fast, then disappear into the jungle before the Americans could coordinate a response. It took them 2 hours to get into position. They camouflaged the Chiha with branches and mud, making it nearly invisible from the road. Then they waited. The sun climbed higher. Sweat poured down their faces inside the cramped tank. Takeshi kept checking his ammunition. Daichi had his hands on the controls, ready to move instantly. Kenji peered through the gun sight, calm as always. Hiroshi listened to the radio. The battle had shifted inland. American forces were pushing toward the airfield. And they were bringing tanks, I hear them, Daichi whispered. The ground vibrated, that familiar rumble of heavy engines. Hiroshi raised his periscope slightly and saw them. 5 Shermans moving in column formation along the dirt road. Behind them, trucks full of infantry. Let them pass, Hiroshi breathed. Wait for my command. The first Sherman rolled by, so close that Hiroshi could see the American commander in the turret, scanning the jungle with binoculars. The second followed. Then the third. The fourth now. Start engine. Daichi fired up the Chiha. The engine roared to life. Before the Americans could react, their tank burst from concealment, moving at full speed toward the rear of the column. Fire, Hiroshi screamed. Kenji pulled the trigger. The 47mm shell struck the last Sherman's rear armor at point-blank range. This time it penetrated. Smoke erupted from the engine compartment. The American tank lurched to a halt, crew scrambling to escape. Track the next one. Left side, they swung around. The second-to-last Sherman was trying to rotate its turret, but they were too close, too fast. Kenji fired again. The shell punched through the side armor. Orange flames blossomed inside. The other 3 Shermans were reversing, trying to bring their guns to bear. But the road was narrow and they were blocking each other. Reverse. Get us out of here. Daichi threw the tank backward. They crashed into the jungle just as a Sherman shell screamed past. Trees exploded around them. Branches rained down on the hull. They drove hard for 3 minutes, weaving through the dense vegetation. When Hiroshi finally called halt, they were half a mile away. The sounds of confused shouting and burning metal echoed through the jungle. Takeshi was laughing, almost hysterical with relief and adrenaline. We did it. We actually killed 2 Shermans. Kenji was reloading, his movements automatic. 2 down. But there are dozens more out there. Hiroshi looked at his crew, all of them alive, all of them fighting. Then we hit them again. And again. Until they learned to fear the light tank that doesn't scare anyone. September 1945. 4 months after Okinawa fell. Hiroshi Tanaka sat in a military hospital in Kyoto, his left arm in a sling. The war was over. Japan had surrendered after the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The empire was broken. The dream was dead. But somehow, against every odd, he was alive. The door opened and Kenji walked in, leaning heavily on a cane. His left leg had been shattered by shrapnel in the final days of fighting. Behind him came Daichi, thinner than before but whole, and last Takeshi, now 19 years old but looking 40. All 4 of them had survived. They sat together in silence for a long time. Outside the window, Kyoto was rebuilding. Life was finding a way to continue, even after everything. I heard from my wife, Kenji said finally. She and Tomoko are safe. They survived the firebombing of Tokyo. He pulled out a photograph, creased and worn. My daughter is 6 now. She writes full sentences. Hiroshi looked at the photo. A little girl with her mother's smile, holding up a drawing of a house and a tree. Something so simple, so precious. What we did at Okinawa, Takeshi said quietly. Did it matter? We killed maybe 20 Sherman tanks. They had hundreds, thousands. We lost everything anyway. Hiroshi thought about that question. They had fought for 72 hours after that first ambush. Hit and run, guerrilla tactics. They had destroyed tanks, delayed advances, made the Americans pay for every meter of ground. Their Chiha had finally been destroyed on the 3rd day. But by then they had become legends among the remaining defenders. The light tank that doesn't scare anyone had terrified an entire battalion. It mattered, Hiroshi said. Not because we won. We were never going to win. But because we chose how to fight. We didn't throw our lives away following stupid orders. We adapted. We survived. And because of that, we get to go home. Daichi nodded slowly. My family's farm is still there. My father wrote. He needs help with the rice harvest. I'm going back to school, Takeshi said. I want to be a teacher. Help rebuild what we destroyed. Kenji smiled for the first time in months. I'm going to watch my daughter grow up. That's enough for me. They sat together as the sun set over Kyoto, 4 men who had seen hell and walked out the other side. The war had taken so much from them. Youth, innocence, friends. But it had also taught them something valuable. That courage isn't about grand gestures or glorious deaths. It's about making smart choices when everything is falling apart. It's about keeping your friends alive when the world wants them dead. The light tank that doesn't scare anyone had terrified a battalion not through strength, but through will, and that made all the difference.